Hey everybody, welcome to the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. I'm here with Dr. DrAlanBarnard. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
You're so welcome.
It's good to have you here. So tell us a little bit about you. How you got into what you do, and then we'll kind of go deeper and make sure that we can give our guests some ideas around some of your theories and ideas and concepts that you've implemented.
Sure. So my name is DrAlanBarnard. I'm CEO of Goldratt Research Labs, and my research lab focuses really on working with organizations and individuals to help them make better, faster decisions when it really matters. That's been a kind of a common theme throughout my life. I've always been curious and understanding why some people are so successful despite often very limiting starting conditions, and realized very early on in that it was not so much about the starting conditions that mattered, but more about the starting assumptions. Henry Ford's famous quote of whether you believe you can do something or can't is kind of relevant. And that got me into the field of decision science. I first studied engineering, worked in corporate for some time, headed up world-class manufacturing for one of the largest breweries in the world. And that experience, gave me an opportunity to experience many different industries, and also combined a sort of, on the one side, this curiosity about how people make decision mistakes, why they make decision mistakes, what can we do to reduce it. And my conclusion was very simple. It's actually very easy to make decision mistakes. Considering all the complexity that we face in our businesses and our life, there's always infinitely more ways to get it wrong than to get it right. So it's actually pretty easy to make mistakes. And secondly, it's actually really hard to learn from them when you do. Because there's gaps or lags between causes and effects, right? So if you touch a hot stove plate, it burns you immediately. It's very easy to learn from that experience. But what if it burnt you a week later or a month later? It'll be really hard. And that's what we face in both our personal lives as well as in business, is there's often these lags. So after I left corporate, I had the opportunity to work with somebody that had become one of my mentors from very early on in my early 20s. I'd read a book that changed my life called The Goal, written by Dr. Goldratt, who's the creator of Theory of Constraints. And later on in my life, in the mid-90s, I started working with him directly on some really big projects. And that gave me an opportunity to work with some of the largest, most complex organizations in the world. And it helped me to test, is it really possible for these companies that have access to the best technology, the best people, the best systems? Is it really possible for them not just to do better, but a lot better? And if so, how and why? And that's kind of how I created the research lab. And that's what we really focus on, is from a corporate side, we work with organizations to find out, are they doing the best that they can? And if not, why, and what can be done, small changes that can have big impacts. And then we also work with individuals. The thing that pulls everything together is helping people make better, faster decisions when it really matters.
It's really especially pertinent right now. It's one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you're seeing big companies, small companies, individuals, organizations, teams, all that. And we're in the middle of one of the very interesting challenge in a lot of people's worlds right now. So what's one of the biggest challenges that you see people facing in this pandemic, financial crisis, health crisis? What do you see?
It's a great question. I think there's an obvious answer. The obvious answer is there's now a lot of uncertainty, right? What to do. And one of the things I tell not just my customers, but myself and my team, is that not knowing something or being uncertain about something only matters if it changes what we're going to be doing. There's a lot of unknowns, but that only really matters if it's going to change what we're going to do. So for example, in a pandemic, from the beginning, there was a lot of uncertainty and unknowns about this virus. We've learned a tremendous amount. But from an individual perspective, it never changed what we should do. We should act as if we have it and people around us have it, maintain social distance, wear a mask, be hygienic, So as soon as you realize that even for business, many of these uncertainties and unknown can be quite overwhelming. But when you stand back and you say, what's the goal that we're trying to achieve? What's the strategies and tactics that we are embarking on to achieve that goal? All of this uncertainty and unknowns, does it really matter? Is it going to change fundamentally any of those? And if so, how would I know when it should change, etc.? So that to me is the kind of the obvious answer. But there's a less obvious answer to me, which is I'm experiencing it not just with other entrepreneurs, but also with myself, which is, when you're comparing your current performance against the targets that we've set for ourselves for this year, for example, and you ask, like, how big is that gap? For some people, it's 10%. We wanted to achieve 100, we only got to 90. For some people, it's like 50%. For some people, it's almost like 100%. We had almost no sales. So there's a gap there. And when there's a performance or expectation gap, that causes stress and anxiety. And it can negatively impact all the other aspects of our life. For an entrepreneur, right? It can impact our health, it can impact our happiness, it can even impact our relationships. But I suspect, and this is just a hypothesis, I suspect that there's an even bigger gap. And the way that I challenge your audience to think about it is to say, okay, I want you to think about what your current impact is that you're making on the world and your current income.
Impact and income, okay.
Those, as an entrepreneur, those, at least for me, those are the things that influences my happiness most, right?
Definitely.
We want to make a big impact and, of course, be rewarded and have a good income as a result. So think about the current impact that you're making. How many people are you positively impacting, this year, last 5 years, pick a number. And what was the income that you generated as a result, right? Now, we've already said that probably you are below your target, maybe by 10%, 50%, maybe even 100%. But there's a much bigger gap, which is, I challenge you to think about the number of people that could positively be impacted by your product or service. How does that compare with the ones that are currently positively being impacted? And if you even got just 1% of the people that could positively be impacted by your product or service, if you could get them to buy just that one product or service that you're offering, right, at the current prices, how much will be your income and impact then? And I suspect that's the thing that's causing the underlying stress and anxiety. We all are intuitively aware of how big that gap is between not just our results and our target, but our results and our potential.
Yes, unused, untapped potential is what we always, it's what we're out there for. So tell me a little bit more about the constraint theory idea and how does that affect how I perform on a daily basis and my decisions, and how do I take it forward?
Sure. So I mentioned that I was very lucky to have met Dr. Eli Goldratt very early on in my life. He created the theory of constraints and wrote this book called The Goal that, Jeff Bezos today still says that it's one of 3 books that he gets his team to read whenever they do an offsite and plan for the future, right? And the basic premise is very simple, is that any system is constrained, else it would achieve infinite goal units, right? And there is no such systems. But when it applies to this problem that we've just described, which is there's a huge gap between our current results and our potential. So I think what's a little bit different in terms of the way that we approach it from a theory of constraints perspective is you might listen to self-help gurus and coaches that tells you've got unlimited potential, right? Of course, that's rubbish. You have limited potential. We have real limits in terms of our own capabilities, in terms of the number of people that could benefit from our products and services. There are real limits. Our capabilities, determines those limits.
Yes.
Right. But we've already seen that probably the potential is much, 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 much higher, not 10%, 50%, 100% more, but 10 times, 50 times, 100 times, 1,000 times more than our results. So the question is not what's limiting our potential. The question is what's limiting our results. Considering you have enough potential out there, stop investing in adding new products, new services, going to new markets. That just increases the potential. It doesn't increase the results. What is constraining you right now from increasing your results? And this was a question we started asking ourselves in the early 2000s. Somebody like Schefren, that works very closely with Jay, he asked himself the same question. We had a chuckle the other day because we both sort of reached the same conclusion from very different perspectives and never meeting each other at that time. But we were asking ourselves the question, even if you're the biggest company in the world or one of the biggest companies, what's really limiting your profitable growth? Is it the size of the market? No, it's not. There's enough potential out there, right? Walmart is like 2 or 3% of the world market. So it's not the size of the market. Could it be access to cash? No, it's not that. Could it be capacity, land, storage? None of those things meet the criteria for constraint, which is the demand on that resource is more than its capacity. And the only answer we could come up with that meets that specific criteria is our limited attention. Specifically, the entrepreneur or the top manager's limited attention. Okay. And I'd like your audience to do just a thought experiment. Think for yourself, the number of things that demand your attention on a daily basis, will that always exceed your available attention? And if you like most of us, you'd say absolutely yes. So once that's clear, that's really the constraint to improving your results, is your limited attention. Then you can apply all the excellent best practices from theory of constraints that says, what do I do if I have a constraint? Well, the first thing is make sure you don't waste it, right? Make sure it's not doing stuff that's not helping. Yes. The equivalent in production is make sure you're not overproducing, right? The customers want 100. Some guy determined that there's an economic batch quantity of 1,000, and now you're producing 1,000, right? And you realize that by trying to be efficient, you're wasting 90% of your capacity, producing stuff that's not needed, or not needed now at least. So the same is true for us, is to think about all the things that demand your attention on a daily basis. How many of those things you should have said no to? And maybe there's a few of them that you should have said hell no to, because a small upside if it really works, right? And a big downside if it didn't. That includes personal choices, right? Like getting a divorce or going on a new diet, or, you know, buying a set of new golf clubs, right? Like, is this really going to be a great option for me? So that's the first part, is to think about how you are currently wasting your limited attention doing something that's actually not helping you increase the results. It might at best help you to increase the potential, but geez, that's not the problem. There's enough potential. We have a problem with results. And what impacts our result is we have limited attention. Once we squeeze the heck out of our attention, we're not doing anything, you know, that is wasting our attention. Everything that we do, or most at least, is really helping us close that gap. Then we can say, okay, how do we get more attention, right? What are the teams that I need to create? What are the partners that I need to bring in that will help me to elevate that scarce resource so that other people can give attention to the same goal I'm chasing?
That's awesome. So if we were to apply this, just a simple thing, however, we could call it an ice cream vendor. How would somebody, because I want to go into the next thing, is you've created tools and other things to help people make better, faster decisions. You and I own an ice cream stand. What are some of, how do we evaluate where our attention should be? What are some of the tools that we should say, I think that this will give us better results? How do I make those decisions with you?
So I think it's once you realize whether you're a single person business or you're in charge of a Fortune 500 company, right? The bottleneck is at the top of the bottle. It's you, right? And it'll always be you. You know, that's a thing that bottles have in common, right? It doesn't matter how many, the shapes and sizes, the bottleneck is always at the top of the bottle. So if you're this ice cream vendor, the same thing should be true, is to say the first step is acknowledge that your limited attention is going to be the constraint, right? Whether you're actually running that store or you just managing somebody else, right? As what should you be focused on? And I think the work that you know, gurus like Jay Abraham has done, and Rich Schefren and others after them, says you always should start with who's your dream customer, right? And how do you attract that customer? That should be your number one priority, is essentially put it in a different way to think about, as the business owner, what do I need to do to get more of the right customers, pay more, buy more frequently? Those are by far the biggest leverage points in any business, right? And yet when you speak to business owners, a small fraction of their time goes into answering those questions.
That's amazing. And people don't ask the right questions because they're just trying to sell stuff. Like right now, is
to anybody, right?
Just sell, turnover. A lot of people in this time frame just make some cash, come in, pay bills. So talk to us about some of the, you've created some of these tools, the ProCon Cloud and things like that. So how did you come up with the theory? And there's the 5 steps that come in there. So
Yeah.
how can we walk through that, and how can people use tools like that to make themselves more efficient?
So when we realized that what the unique contribution is that we want to make is we want to, on the one side, I mentioned it's really easy to make decision mistakes, right?
Yes.
And hard to learn from them. So we wanted to turn that around. We wanted to create apps that actually makes it hard to make a bad decision, right?
Yes.
You really have to try to mess it up. And secondly, that if you do, which we will always do, that it's easy to learn from them. And what we've created is basically free apps. Each of these apps have just been designed to prevent a common decision mistake. So the first app, which is the one that you mentioned, called the Harmony Decision Maker, and that uses this methodology I developed called the Procon Cloud. That's specifically aimed at decisions that we get wrong because we don't realize how much of an influence our strong emotions have on our decisions. We often procrastinate, right? Not because we don't see the benefit of making the change or the negative if we don't. We procrastinate because we have some exaggerated fear of effort or risk, or effort or fear, an exaggerated fear of loss. And the app basically helps us to discover what those exaggerated fears of loss, effort, and risk is, and help us to overcome them in a very simple, practical way, something that will take you maybe an hour to go through. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake is where we overreact and we make bad changes or choices. And that's often because of an exaggerated frustration with the current status quo, right? Our IT system isn't working properly. Somebody is behaving, doing something that's irritating, and we overreact, we lose our temper, we fire them, or whatever it is, or an exaggerated expectation. And again, the app is really very efficient to help us discover what those limiting beliefs or assumptions are and help us to check and challenge them. So that's what the first app does. So it's really helping to make better decisions by discovering and overcoming some of these limiting beliefs. The second app that we've developed is called the Harmony Change Simulators, and we actually have a range of ones. So imagine you've made a decision that you're in a project environment. Maybe you're a construction company or you do IT implementations, and you've identified that many of the problems can be solved in your business by implementing a best practice like agile or fear of constraints, etc. But what we know is people will resist change if they can't predict the outcome of those changes. And many of these best practices often are very counterintuitive from a local perspective, so the rules to global optimize are often very counterintuitive from a local perspective. And what these change simulators allow us to do is basically to answer 2 fundamental questions. So we can build a digital twin of your project environment. We can build a digital twin of your retail environment, whether you're a little small ice cream shop or you're a Walmart, right? We can build a digital twin of a full supply chain or a mine, etc. And what these digital twins allow us to do is to, first of all, check, is it possible to do much better than what you're doing? So we can actually simulate your current environment. And secondly, how much better could you do by implementing some of these best practices? So an example of that, we built a simulation model for Microsoft's global supply chain and showed them that they can dramatically reduce their inventory levels while at the same time improving service levels and reducing lost sales. And that gave them the confidence to actually then go and implement the best practices, inside of their IT system. So that's what our second range of apps does. And we have a whole range of them for different types of environments. And they allow us to simulate the impact of changes so that, we can better understand them, but also to overcome the resistance to change. And then the last one is what we call a Harmony Change Maker app, which is, I've made a decision, to climb up this mountain, to get a pot of gold, get away from all the bad stuff in my current situation. I've been able to simulate it with our decision, with our change simulators, which is the best route up the mountain. The Change Maker app is really guiding you through the process of being able to plan complex changes. And the mistakes that we make there is we get overwhelmed with changes. We make many changes that are not needed. We don't do them in the right way. And that kind of Change Maker app guides you through the process all the way from what's a goal, what is the turnaround strategy to deliver that goal, what are all the assumptions that you're making, assigning resources, cost, planning it all out, and then monitoring the execution and doing auditing. So those are the free apps that we've developed.
That's amazing. And so when you're interacting, or your team's interacting with companies, how do they engage you, and because you've got the awesome free apps, but then I could get a free surgery app, and I'm not a doctor, so I still need somebody to help me either hold my feet to the fire.
All of our apps have sort of levels. So there's a free level that allows you to experience the app, right? So for example, our Harmony Decision Maker app, you can go onto the mobile app stores now and download Harmony Decision Maker for free, right? And it will guide you through 5 steps to make a better decision, whatever decision you're facing, or allow you to analyze a past mistake that you've made and learn from it. But if you want to do more, then there's a subscription option. And then there's also an option to work directly with our team. So for all of our apps, we have those free levels. So a practical example is one of the biggest, online retailers, you can imagine who they are, contacted us and said, we've got this whole range of projects that we're doing at the moment. We're ramping up dramatically. We are not sure whether we're going to be able to deliver on our commitments, right? We said, great, what we can do is we can take our standard platform that allows you to simulate your project environment. We can take data directly out of your project management system, press the play button and show you what will happen, right? If you really considered all the variability and the interdependencies, etc., something that you cannot do when you're doing static calculations or you're using a simple project management app, right? You're picking, somebody estimates a task to take 20 days. That's a point in a distribution. I want to be able to press the play button and do 100 iterations that show me all the possible outcomes, right? Best, worst, best, worst, best. And that's what we can do with simulations. It's almost like predicting the range of a hurricane progressing in the future, whereas the short term, your range is quite narrow because you're quite accurate there. But as it opens up, your range of possibilities go up. So once you run that and you can see this is what's likely going to happen, then you can say, okay, let's test different strategies. What would be the best strategy to achieve the outcomes that we really want? And that's a kind of a do it with you or do it for you option. So that's kind of how a customer might see me doing a presentation showing the apps that we've got, how we've used them in the past, and they contact us. We've been very lucky so far that most of our sales are just word of mouth. Somebody sees what we do, they see the Microsoft case study, how we reduced their inventories by over $250 million in the first financial year, and go, wow, we'd be curious to know if that's possible for our company.
That's awesome. So here's one for you. What's the toughest question that any entrepreneur has ever, or business has ever given you?
Wow, that's a really interesting one.
I'll give you a chance to think about it. So tell me have a think about that. What are you listening to or reading right now? What's in the podcast world or in the whatever else is you're out doing out there to occupy your time when you're not telling everybody stuff? Where are you learning things?
Yeah, so I think on the business side, people like Jay Abraham, who you also follow, I mean, he's just a walking encyclopedia of knowledge, right?
Yes, he's fun.
I'm working with him, partnering with him, but I'm also listening into all the other stuff that he's doing. It's just incredible to see that level of experience. I've been in business for 30 years. He's been in business for 40 years. And just the amount of lessons that he's learned and to find those commonalities. The same with Rich Schefren, he's been around forever, the guru of the gurus. So those are 2 guys professionally that I'm learning a tremendous amount. And I'm hoping to, that there's some way that I'm returning the favor that they're also learning from me. On the reading side, it's interesting. I met up with a billionaire the other day, which is really fascinating, a meeting. And he said to me, like, what are you reading? And I shared with him, and it's like, what are you reading? And he said, he's reading this book called Happy for No Reason. And it's basically a story of this woman that set all these goals for herself at the age of 20. And, fast forward, she's met all the goals, right? So she's got a book on the top New York sellers list. She's just delivered a killer presentation to 8,000 people. She's got the husband she wants, the house, the body, the kids, everything. And next moment she bursts out crying because she realized that what she had in her mind was this simple rule that said, you'll be happy when.
Yes.
And suddenly all the wins are there and you're not happy. Now what? So it's I'm always very curious about decision making and psychology. So those are the type of books that I'm always reading.
Very cool. And besides the awesome apps that you have, what are some things that are making your world a happier place or a better place when it comes to technology? Besides Zoom, obviously making at least connectivity a little bit better during global lockdowns.
Yeah, I think, I was just looking yesterday, right? So I moved into a new condo and I was looking for some stuff, basic stuff, and it's just the ability to go online. I ordered a full-size mirror from Target for $7, right? $7. And they gave me an option for curbside pickup, right? So after this interview, I'm driving there less than 8 hours after I placed an order, and they bring the thing outside and you pick it up and you leave. And you just think about that, how absolutely earth-shattering that is, right? It's the advancements that has been made. Businesses that, I see, I have a group of entrepreneurs that I work with that have restaurants and events businesses. Many of their businesses was devastated, but those that were able to pivot, that said, look, the rules have changed. We can bitch and moan about the rules, or we can learn this new game and learn how to be profitable. And they've pivoted their business, and curbside selling for them is a huge thing, right? And learn how to do that. So you try it out and you find out that the queues are too long, you're not coping. How can I change that? Can I offer a discount for people to arrive when I have capacity versus when I don't? And that to me is a fascinating thing, is that when there's a crisis, there's always opportunities to learn fundamental things about, what do we need to be prepared to do.
That's awesome. And then kind of, how can people follow you? Where do they learn more about you? And obviously,
I have the simplest way is I have a YouTube channel, just search for Dr. DrAlanBarnard. I have hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos that we share there. As a research lab, our job is to look at wicked problems that hasn't been solved by anybody else, come up with hypotheses, test those with clients, see if we could solve them. And once we've solved them, then we release that knowledge. Obviously, things that are not competitive advantages, but we release that knowledge. And the YouTube channel is the best way of doing that. I also have a podcast series called Impossible Unless. And this is a simple technique I developed, which is one of our most limiting assumptions is when we tell ourselves it's impossible to achieve something. And what this technique does is it says, okay, so take a goal, increase the magnitude of the goal until you say, now it's impossible. And just ask yourself, it's impossible unless, and just let that float in your brain. What you'll find is your brain can't help itself. It will give you all the conditions that will make it possible. And the more ambitious the target is, the fewer options you have. So it really helps you to identify those vital few changes that you can make in your life or your business that can get you to a next level of performance. Just by asking you the simple question, it's impossible unless, ? So in my podcast, every episode, we pick a target that most people would agree could be impossible. And then we share with them the unless conditions that we discovered through our research. And then obviously the other ways of following me is on Facebook and LinkedIn. We publish a lot of content on social media.
That's very cool. So usually I ask people what's their quick fire tip, but I think impossible unless is probably a very pertinent quick fire tip. So giving you a little bit of time, have you come up with anything on a tricky question that an entrepreneur's given you? Or is it still...
It comes back to where's the real constraint, right? And that when that was asked to us, 20 years ago, that was difficult to answer because everything we suggested, no, that's not the constraint. It's not the size of the market. It's not cash. So for me, my most profound insight at that time was the real constraint is your limited attention. Right? What awesome. And who you pay attention to is going to make all the difference. And there's sort of two ways. As the first one is what should you be saying hell no to, right? That's not only wasting the scarce resource, but can actually cause you or your business real harm. And those are the ones that, has a small upside if it works and a big downside if it doesn't. And it's amazing how often we go and exercise those options as if they're good options. It's like playing Russian roulette, it doesn't matter what the probability of success is. What matters is the probability not of failure, which is just the opposite of the probability of success. What matters is the impact of success on failure. You know, with playing Russian roulette, your probability of success is 5 out of 6, right?
Yeah.
Should you do it because it feels more certain? No, because if it works, you keep on living, right? Small upside. If it doesn't work, you know, you lose an important part of your body, right? So that to me is like, what are those hell no's to definitely not do? And then the hell yeses, which is things that you probably have already, but you're not getting to them because you're spreading yourself too thin, right? You have too many things on your to-do list. Those are the hell yeses. Those few things or those few people that if you worked with can give you a big, big upside if it works and a small downside if it doesn't.
That's awesome. Dr. Alan Barnard, thanks for coming on the Grow, Sell, and Retire podcast. And this is a hell yes as a great podcast for lots of great content. Thanks for coming on.
You're so welcome.